Have you ever wondered what happens when a perfect life shatters in public? Logan Vale had it all. A billion-dollar empire, a stunning home, and a beautiful, pregnant wife. Nora Vale. He was the king of his world, and she was his queen. But behind the gilded doors of their mansion, a devastating secret was festering. What happens when the king invites his mistress to dinner, not knowing his pregnant queen is about to walk in? This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of humiliation, of a woman's breaking point, and the earth-shattering moment a single glass of spilled wine can bring a powerful man to his knees. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to know. And if powerful stories move you, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Let's dive in. The silence in their cavernous home was Nora's first clue. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a weighted one, thick with unspoken words and the ghosts of conversations that never happened. It clung to the marble floors of the foyer, slithered up the grand, sweeping staircase, and pooled in the dark corners of the rooms she no longer felt belonged to her. Nora Vale, 6 months pregnant and perpetually exhausted, felt more like a curator of a museum than the lady of the house. The house, a modernist marvel of glass and steel perched atop the Hollywood Hills, was Logan's masterpiece. He called it the Vale Jewel, a testament to his success, his vision, his unyielding will. To Nora, it felt like a beautiful, transparent prison, where every move was observable, yet her own heart was invisible. Logan Vale was a man forged in the crucible of Wall Street and refined in the tech boom of Silicon Valley. He was sharp, decisive, and possessed a charisma that could bend reality to his liking. When he looked at you, you felt like the only person in the universe. Nora had basked in that gaze for 5 years, believing it was a sun she could orbit forever. Now she knew it was more like a spotlight, and it could be switched off at a moment's notice. The pregnancy, which should have been their shared joy, had become another one of Logan's projects. He'd hired the best obstetrician in Los Angeles, a nutritionist who sent prepackaged meals in sterile containers, and a designer to create a nursery that looked more like a minimalist art installation than a room for a baby. He managed the pregnancy, but he didn't share in it. He never touched her belly unless she guided his hand. And when he did, his touch was distant, his eyes already on the stock market ticker flashing across his phone. Her suspicions had started as a whisper, a faint unease she couldn't quite name. It was in the late-night board meetings that left his shirt smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers, a cloying, expensive scent, something with notes of jasmine and audacity. It was in the second phone, the sleek, anonymous burner he called his international line, that would buzz at odd hours. When she'd once asked who was calling so late, he'd smiled that disarming smile and said, "That's the price of being a global player, darling. The world never sleeps, but the world," Nora was beginning to realize, had a name, and she suspected that name was Lena. Lena Hart was a name that dripped from the society pages like honey. An art gallery owner with a pedigree as impressive as her portfolio, she was everything Nora was not. Where Nora was quiet, Lena was loud. Where Nora preferred the soft comfort of a cashmere sweater, Lena was always sheathed in something bold and unforgiving. Leather, silk, a slash of crimson lipstick her signature weapon. She was a part of Logan's world in a way Nora had never been. Nora was the beautiful, serene wife, the perfect accessory for galas and charity balls. Lena was his intellectual equal, his sparring partner, a reflection of his own ruthless ambition. Nora had seen them together once, months ago, at a fundraiser. She'd been standing by the bar, feeling whale-like in her couture gown, when she saw Logan leaning in close to Lena. He wasn't just talking. He was consuming her with his eyes, his hand resting on the small of her back, with a familiarity that sent a shard of ice through Nora's heart. Lena had laughed, a throaty, confident sound that cut through the polite chatter of the room. and placed her hand on his chest. It was a gesture of ownership. A brand. When Nora had confronted him later that night, her voice trembling, he had deployed his most potent weapon: gaslighting. "Lena." "Darling, don't be ridiculous," he'd said, loosening his tie as if her accusation was a minor annoyance. "She's a business associate, a very important one. Are you going to start getting jealous of every woman I speak to? It's not a good look, Nora, especially not now. The stress isn't good for the baby." The baby. It was always the baby. Her condition was no longer a source of intimacy, but a shield he used to deflect, to control, to silence her. He made her feel as if her hormones were the problem, that her intuition was just a symptom of a hysterical pregnancy. She had started to doubt her own sanity, to believe that maybe she was just being paranoid. But the signs kept coming, like a slow, toxic leak. A credit card statement she wasn't meant to see, with a charge for a diamond bracelet from a boutique she'd never been to. A hushed, angry phone call she overheard from the hallway, Logan's voice a low snarl. "I told you to be patient. You can't just show up like that." Tonight was supposed to be different. Logan had announced it over breakfast without looking up from his tablet. "I'm taking you to dinner tonight. L'Orangerie. Just the two of us." L'Orangerie was their place. It was where he had proposed, on a terrace dripping with bougainvillea, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. It was where they went for anniversaries, for celebrations. It was a place of memories, a sanctuary. The suggestion felt like an olive branch, a promise to reconnect. A flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe the stress of his latest merger had just made him distant. She spent the afternoon trying to recapture the woman he had fallen in love with. She had a long bath, the scent of lavender filling the enormous marble bathroom. She chose a dress with care, a deep sapphire silk that draped elegantly over her baby bump, making her feel graceful rather than cumbersome. She styled her blonde hair in soft waves and applied her makeup with a hand that was surprisingly steady. As she looked at her reflection, she saw a glimmer of the old Nora, the woman who was confident, loved, and secure. Logan was waiting for her downstairs, a glass of whiskey in hand. He looked up as she descended the stairs, and for a moment, his eyes held that old, familiar warmth. "You look breathtaking," he said, his voice a low purr. He kissed her, a brief, passionless press of lips. "Ready to go?" The drive down the winding canyon roads was quiet, but this time it was a comfortable silence. Nora allowed herself to relax, to believe. She rested a hand on her belly, where the baby was kicking softly, a secret conversation between the two of them. She watched Logan's handsome profile, the strong line of his jaw illuminated by the passing streetlights, and thought, "We can fix this. We have to." L'Orangerie was as magical as she remembered. The maître d', a stately man named Jean-Luc, greeted them with a familiar smile. "Monsieur and Madame Val, a pleasure. Your usual table is ready." Their table was in a secluded alcove, surrounded by fragrant orange trees and lit by the soft glow of candles. It was perfect. Logan was attentive, pulling out her chair, ordering her a sparkling water with a twist of lime without even asking. He talked about his day. But for once, he wasn't just boasting about his victories. He asked about her, about the baby, about her plans for the nursery. He seemed present, engaged. "I'm sorry I've been so distracted lately, Nora," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. His thumb stroked her knuckles. "This merger has been a beast, but it's almost done. Then I'm all yours." "All yours," he repeated, his eyes meeting hers. Nora's heart swelled with relief. It was going to be okay. She squeezed his hand, a tear of gratitude pricking her eye. "I've missed you, Logan. I've missed you too," he whispered. The appetizers arrived, a delicate dance of flavors on a porcelain plate. The conversation flowed. They laughed. It felt like old times, like before the silence had moved in. Nora felt the tight knot of anxiety in her chest finally begin to loosen. It was as the waiter was clearing their plates that the world tilted on its axis. "Logan, darling, I thought that was you." The voice was unmistakable, throaty, confident, and dripping with a proprietary familiarity. Nora's head snapped up. Standing by their table, a vision in a fire engine red dress that clung to her like a second skin, was Lena Hart. She wasn't looking at Nora. Her eyes, a startling shade of emerald green, were locked on Logan. A wide, predatory smile played on her crimson lips. Nora's blood ran cold. This was no coincidence. The world didn't shrink this conveniently, not even in a city as incestuous as Los Angeles. Logan's reaction was a study in controlled panic. A flicker of shock, quickly masked by a cool, charming smile. He dropped Nora's hand as if it were hot coal. "Lena, what a surprise," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. He stood up, a perfect gentleman. "I was just having a drink at the bar and saw you two tucked away back here." Lena purred, her gaze finally sliding over to Nora. It wasn't a glance. It was an assessment, a dismissal. Her eyes lingered for a fraction of a second on Nora's swollen belly, and a flicker of something, triumph, pity, crossed her face. "You must be Nora. Logan has told me so little about you." The insult was as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "So little about you." As if she were a footnote in her own husband's life, Nora felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Logan, pleading with her eyes for him to say something, to fix this, to draw a line in the sand. Tell her to leave. Tell her she's mistaken. Tell her who I am. But Logan just stood there, trapped between his wife and his mistress, his charming smile frozen on his face. "Nora, this is Lena Hart, a colleague. Colleague." The word was a lie, a pathetic, flimsy shield. Lena extended a perfectly manicured hand, her diamond bracelet, the one from the credit card statement, flashing under the candlelight. "A pleasure to finally meet you," she said, her voice laced with a sweetness that was more poisonous than venom. Nora couldn't bring herself to take the offered hand. Her own hands were trembling in her lap. She felt the baby give a sharp, sudden kick, as if it, too, could sense the poison in the air. "Why don't you join us?" Logan said suddenly, the words tumbling out of his mouth before he could stop them. It was a fatal miscalculation, a desperate attempt to normalize an impossible situation. He was trying to manage it, to control the narrative, just as he managed everything else. Lena's smile widened. "I'd love to. I was just about to have dinner myself." Without waiting for a response from Nora, she gracefully slid into the booth, right next to Logan, her thigh pressing against his. The intimate space of their alcove, their sanctuary, had been invaded. The air grew thick, suffocating. Nora stared at her husband, a silent scream trapped in her throat. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was looking at the wine list, his face a mask of feigned nonchalance. He had not only failed to protect her, he had actively invited the enemy into their camp. He had sat his mistress down at their table, in their restaurant, and called her a colleague. The hope that had flickered to life within her just moments before was brutally extinguished. In its place, a cold, hard certainty began to form. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. This was a declaration of war. And she was sitting on the wrong side of the battlefield. The waiter returned, his professional smile unwavering, oblivious to the emotional carnage unfolding in the candlelit alcove. "Are we ready to order another bottle of wine, monsieur?" "Absolutely!" Logan boomed, seizing the distraction. He was a man adrift, and the wine list was his life raft. "Let's get the Mistress, a celebration." Nora stared at him, aghast. The Petru was their wine, The wine he had ordered the night he proposed. It cost more than most people's monthly rent. To order it now, with her here, was not just an insult. It was a desecration. A celebration. "What are we celebrating, darling?" Lena asked, leaning in closer to Logan, her voice a seductive whisper that was meant for Nora to hear. She ran a single, red-nailed finger down the lapel of his jacket. Logan cleared his throat, finally daring a glance at Nora. His eyes were pleading, desperate. "Play along, please, just play along." But Nora's face was a mask of stone. The ability to play along, to be the good, quiet wife, had been stripped from her. "The merger," Logan said, his voice strained. "It's finally complete. A huge win for the company." "Oh, I know all about the merger," Lena said, her gaze sliding to Nora, a smug, knowing look in her eyes. "Logan and I pulled many a late night getting that deal across the finish line, didn't we, Elle?" Elle. The casual intimacy of the nickname was another twist of the knife. Nora felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to grip the edge of the table. The prepackaged meal from the nutritionist churned in her stomach. She could feel the color draining from her face, the room starting to spin. The sommelier arrived with the bottle of Petrus, presenting it to Logan with the reverence reserved for a holy relic. The ritual of it all, the careful uncorking, the splash of deep ruby liquid into a glass for Logan to taste, felt like a grotesque parody. Logan swirled the wine, sniffed it, and nodded his approval, a king presiding over a court that was crumbling around him. "Excellent," he declared. The sommelier poured 2 glasses, one for Logan, one for Lena. He then turned to Nora, a bottle of sparkling water in hand. "And for Madame? She'll have a glass of the wine," Lena said, her voice sharp and commanding. She waved a dismissive hand at Nora's belly. "Oh, come on. A little sip won't hurt the... European women do it all the time. You Americans are so puritanical." The sheer audacity of it stole Nora's breath. This woman, this stranger who was sleeping with her husband, was now dictating what she should and should not drink during her pregnancy. She was trying to paint Nora as a hysterical, overprotective mother-to-be, a cliché. Nora looked to Logan, expecting, praying for him to intervene. This was his chance. A simple, "No, Nora isn't drinking," would suffice. It would be a small gesture, but it would be something. It would be a sign that he still saw her, that she still mattered. Logan hesitated. He looked from Lena's challenging smirk to Nora's pale, desperate face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He was paralyzed, a coward caught in the crossfire. His silence was his answer. It was the most damning answer of all. In that moment, something inside Nora snapped. It wasn't a loud, violent break, but a quiet, seismic fracture. The years of being managed, of being silenced, of having her feelings dismissed as hormonal or irrational, coalesced into a single point of unbearable pressure. The woman who had spent the afternoon trying to be graceful and beautiful was gone. The woman who had hoped for reconciliation was gone. All that was left was a raw, primal instinct for self-preservation. She had to get out. She couldn't breathe. The jasmine and audacity of Lena's perfume was choking her. The weight of Logan's betrayal was crushing her. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the stone floor. The sound was jarring in the hushed, elegant restaurant. Both Logan and Lena turned to look at her. "I'm not feeling well," Nora said, her voice a low, trembling whisper. It was the only sound she could manage. "I need some air." She stood up, her body unsteady. Her hand, clumsy and uncoordinated, reached for her purse on the table. And in that single, fumbling movement, her arm brushed against the slender stem of Lena's wine glass. Time seemed to slow down. She saw the glass wobble, a precarious dance on the edge of the white linen tablecloth. She saw the deep red liquid, the sacred celebratory Petrus, slosh against the crystal. And then, with a horrifying, inevitable grace, it tipped. The entire glass of wine, a river of crimson, cascaded directly onto the lap of Logan's pristine, cream-colored Tom Ford suit. It was a spectacular disaster. The wine soaked into the expensive fabric instantly, a dark, spreading stain of shame and accusation. It looked like a wound, a stigmata. A collective gasp went through the alcove. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of the wine falling from the hem of Logan's jacket onto the floor. Lena was the first to react, letting out a theatrical shriek. "Oh my God, Logan, your suit!" Logan leaped to his feet, staring down at his ruined trousers in disbelief. His face, which had been a mask of panicked charm, was now contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The public humiliation was more than he could bear. He was Logan Vale. Things like this didn't happen to him. He was the one who spilled things, who made messes that other people cleaned up. He looked up at Nora, and the look in his eyes was terrifying. The mask was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was a cold, reptilian rage. He saw not his pregnant wife, but the agent of his public disgrace. "What the hell did you just do?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous, so only she could hear. But Nora barely heard him. She was staring at the stain, at the beautiful, ugly, perfect mess she had made. It wasn't an accident. She knew that in the deepest part of her fractured soul. It was a release. It was a scream made visible. It was 5 years of silent frustration, of suspicion, of being made to feel small and crazy, all erupting in a single, clumsy, glorious act of defiance. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She simply looked at Logan, at the ugly red stain blooming across his lap. And then she looked at Lena, whose face was a mixture of shock and fury. And then Nora turned and walked away. She didn't run. She walked, her head held high, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She walked past the stunned waiters, past the curious glances of the other diners, past Jean-Luc, whose professional composure had finally cracked. She walked out of the fragrant, magical restaurant, their sanctuary, and into the cool, indifferent night air. She didn't look back. She knew what she would see. She would see her husband, the great Logan Vale, standing there humiliated, covered in the wine he had chosen to celebrate his betrayal. She would see his kingdom. For one brief, shining moment, in utter disarray. And for the first time in a very long time, Nora Vale felt like she could breathe again. The drive home was a blur. Nora didn't remember getting into her car or navigating the winding canyon roads. She drove on autopilot, her mind a maelstrom of shock, adrenaline, and a terrifying, exhilarating sense of freedom. The silence in the car was her own, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of her marriage. It was a clean slate. When she walked back into the glass house, it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a stage, and the final act had just been performed. She went straight upstairs, not to their shared master suite, but to one of the guest rooms at the far end of the house. It was a sterile, impersonal space, but it was hers. She locked the door, a gesture she hadn't made in 5 years, and the simple click of the lock was the most satisfying sound she had ever heard. She sank onto the bed, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the confrontation. The baby was quiet now, as if sensing the storm had passed. Nora wrapped her arms around her belly, a primal, protective gesture. "It's just you and me now," she whispered into the empty room. "It's just you and me." She didn't cry. The tears were lodged somewhere deep inside, frozen by a cold, hard anger. She had been pushed and pushed and pushed, and tonight she had finally pushed back. The image of the red wine blooming across Logan's perfect suit was seared into her mind. It was a brand of her own, a mark of her pain. An hour later, she heard his car screech into the driveway. She heard the front door slam with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of the glass house. She heard his heavy, angry footsteps on the marble floor below. "Nora!" His voice was a roar, echoing through the empty mansion. It was the voice he used to eviscerate underlings in the boardroom, a voice of pure, unchecked power. "Where the hell are you?" She heard him storm up the stairs. He tried the handle of their master bedroom, then slammed the door open when he found it empty. "Nora!" His footsteps grew closer, stopping outside her locked door. He rattled the handle, a violent, impatient sound. "Open this door. Right now." Nora stayed silent, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was afraid, but it was a different kind of fear than she had ever known. It wasn't the fear of a meek wife cowering from her husband's displeasure. It was the fear of a cornered animal that had just discovered it had claws. "Nora, I am not going to say it again!" he bellowed, his fist pounding against the wood. "You embarrassed me! You humiliated me in front of everyone, in front of Lena! Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I know exactly what I've done," she thought. "I've finally shown you who I am." His rage was not about a ruined suit. It was about his loss of control. He had orchestrated the evening, confident he could manage both women, keeping them in their separate, designated boxes. He had underestimated her. He had assumed her silence was weakness. Her compliance was contentment. He had never imagined she was capable of such a messy, public, and beautifully defiant act. His pounding continued for another minute, a furious, impotent rhythm. Then silence. She heard him muttering, cursing. She heard him stomp back down the stairs. A few minutes later, she heard the roar of his sports car as he tore out of the driveway and back into the night. He was running back to Lena, she knew. Back to the woman who understood his world, who wouldn't challenge him, who would soothe his bruised ego and tell him how right he was, how crazy his pregnant wife had become. Left in the echoing silence, Nora finally allowed herself to break. The frozen tears thawed, and she began to sob. Not the quiet, stifled sobs of a victim, but the great, shuddering, cleansing sobs of a survivor. She cried for the man she thought she had married, for the love she thought they had shared. She cried for the baby who would be born into this broken home, and she cried for herself, for the years she had lost, for the woman she had allowed herself to become. Meanwhile, Logan was speeding down the freeway, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The rage was a physical thing, a hot, bitter bile in his throat. He wasn't just angry, he was incandescent with a fury born of pure narcissism. How dare she? How dare she make a scene? He drove straight to Lena's gallery in Beverly Hills. The lights were on in the loft apartment above. He used his own key to let himself in. He found her in the living room, pouring 2 glasses of brandy. She was wearing a silk robe, the red dress discarded on a chair. She looked up as he entered, her expression a careful mixture of sympathy and concern. "Elle, you poor thing," she said, her voice a velvet balm. She handed him a glass. "I can't believe she did that. She's completely unhinged." Logan took the brandy and downed it in one gulp, the fire of it doing little to quell the fire in his gut. "Unhinged doesn't even begin to describe it. She's lost her mind." "It's the pregnancy, darling," Lena said, stroking his arm. "It makes some women so emotional, unpredictable. You can't blame yourself." But he did blame himself. Not for the affair, not for the lies, but for his own miscalculation. He had thought he could have it all. The perfect, respectable wife and the exciting, intelligent mistress. He had thought he was smart enough to keep his 2 worlds from colliding. Tonight had been a catastrophic failure of management, and Logan Vale did not fail. "She did it on purpose," he snarled, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "I saw it in her eyes. She wanted to humiliate me." "Of course she did," Lena agreed, her voice smooth and persuasive. "She's jealous. She knows she can't compete with me, with us. She's a small provincial woman, and she's terrified of losing you." This was a desperate, pathetic cry for attention. Every word she spoke was designed to soothe his ego, to reinforce his narrative. She was recasting the evening's events, painting Nora as the villain, the hysterical shrew, and him as the long-suffering husband. It was exactly what he wanted to hear. "What are you going to do?" Lena asked, her hand moving from his arm to his chest. Logan looked at her beautiful, clever face. She was his equal. She was a reflection of his own ambition. She would never embarrass him like that. She was part of the life he wanted, the life he deserved. Nora, with her quiet judgments and her inconvenient pregnancy, was an anchor, holding him back. "I'm going to end it," he said, the decision crystallizing in his mind, cold and hard as a diamond. "I'm done." Lena's smile was slow, triumphant. "I think that's a very wise decision," she said, her lips finding his. As Logan lost himself in Lena's embrace, trying to erase the stain of his humiliation, he was oblivious to the profound shift that had occurred. He thought he was taking back control. He thought he was cutting a liability from his portfolio. He couldn't comprehend that the woman he was discarding had just found a strength he never knew she possessed. He thought he was winning, but in reality, he had just lost everything that truly mattered. The glass house he had built so carefully was about to shatter, and he was the one who had thrown the first stone. The days that followed were a war of attrition fought by lawyers. Logan, true to his nature, went on the offensive. He had Nora served with divorce papers the very next day. The documents were delivered by a cold-faced courier to the glass house, a thick, intimidating manila envelope that felt like a bomb. The terms were brutal. Logan was leveraging a prenuptial agreement that Nora had signed in a haze of love and trust 5 years ago. It was an ironclad document designed to protect his burgeoning empire, leaving her with a pittance, a fraction of what she was entitled to after 5 years of marriage. He was trying to starve her out, to force her into a quick, quiet surrender. He offered a settlement that was generous by normal standards, but insulting given his vast wealth. It came with a condition, a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive it would essentially erase her from his history. She would be a ghost. His strategy was clear: to paint her as the unstable, irrational party. His lawyer, a shark in a bespoke suit named Owen Black, leaked carefully curated stories to the gossip columns. They hinted at a troubled marriage, at Nora's erratic behavior during the pregnancy. The wine incident was spun into a tale of a hysterical outburst, a public meltdown. They were trying to discredit her, to isolate her. For the first week, Nora felt like she was drowning. The legal jargon, the veiled threats, the public character assassination. It was an overwhelming assault. She stayed locked in the guest room, the house a constant humming reminder of Logan's power. She felt small, helpless, a pawn in a game she didn't know how to play. The turning point came not from a lawyer, but from her sister, Maya. Maya was a social worker in Chicago, a woman grounded in a reality a million miles away from the gilded cage of Los Angeles. When Nora finally found the courage to call her, her voice cracking as she recounted the story, Maya didn't offer pity. She offered fury. "That son of a bitch," Maya said, her voice a righteous roar over the phone. "He thinks he can just buy your silence? He thinks he can throw money at you and make you disappear? Oh, hell no. We are not letting that happen." The next day, Maya was on a plane. She arrived at the glass house like a force of nature, her sensible shoes and determined expression a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of the place. She took one look at her pale, trembling sister, and her first act was to march into the kitchen, past the nutritionist-approved meals, and make a pot of coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs. "First you eat," she commanded. "Then we fight." Maya was the anchor Nora needed. She helped her find a lawyer, not a slick corporate shark like Owen Black, but a woman named Ava Reed, a renowned family law attorney known for her tenacity and her refusal to be intimidated by wealth. Ava was a small, formidable woman with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. In their first meeting, she listened to Nora's entire story without interruption. She read Logan's proposed settlement, her expression hardening with each page. "This isn't a settlement," Ava said, her voice calm but laced with steel. "This is an insult. He's trying to bully you. He's counting on you being too scared and too tired to fight back. He's made a mistake." For the first time, a flicker of hope ignited in Nora. With Maya by her side and Ava as her champion, she no longer felt alone. She was part of a team. The first step was to leave the glass house. It was Logan's territory, a psychological battlefield where she was at a constant disadvantage. Maya helped her pack. They didn't take the designer clothes or the expensive jewelry. They packed her personal belongings, the sentimental things that Logan had always dismissed as clutter. Her books, her photographs, a box of letters from her grandmother. They were reclaiming her identity, piece by piece. She found a small, furnished bungalow in Santa Monica, a few blocks from the beach. It was modest, a world away from the palatial emptiness of the Hollywood Hills, but it was filled with light and the sound of the ocean. For the first time in months, Nora felt like she had a home. As the legal battle raged on, Nora focused on her health and the baby. She fired the nutritionist and the celebrity obstetrician. She found a local midwife, a warm, down-to-earth woman who talked to her about birth plans and breathing exercises, not just risk factors and liability. She started walking on the beach every morning, the salt spray on her face feeling like a baptism. She was slowly, painfully, coming back to herself. Meanwhile, Logan's world was not as perfect as he had imagined. His victory in securing the merger felt hollow. The public nature of the divorce was a blemish on his carefully crafted image. His board of directors, a group of old-money conservatives, were not impressed by the gossip column headlines. They valued stability, discretion. A messy public divorce from a pregnant wife was not discreet. Lena, too, was not the perfect partner he had envisioned. Now that she had won, a certain hardness had emerged. She was possessive, demanding. She was constantly pushing for them to make their relationship public, to be seen at all the right places. She was trying to cement her position as the new Mrs. Vale. But Logan found himself hesitating. The victory felt tainted. He started thinking about Nora, not the hysterical woman from the restaurant, but the woman he had first fallen in love with. He remembered her quiet intelligence, her gentle laugh, the way she could listen for hours without feeling the need to talk about herself. He had mistaken her serenity for a lack of ambition, her kindness for weakness. He was beginning to see that her strength was just of a different kind, a quiet, resilient strength that he had tried and failed to break. The hidden motive for his cruelty, he was forced to admit in the lonely hours of the night, was fear. He had been terrified of the baby, of the profound, irreversible change it represented. The baby was not something he could control, not a deal he could manage. It was a lifetime of responsibility, of vulnerability. It required a part of himself he had long ago buried, his heart. Lena was safe. She was all sharp edges and ambition, a mirror of himself. She would never ask for his heart, only for his status and his wealth. Nora, and the baby she carried, asked for everything. His redemption began not with a grand gesture, but with a small, private act of contrition. He was in his office late one night, unable to sleep, when he came across a file for a charitable foundation he had set up for tax purposes and then promptly forgotten. It was a foundation for underprivileged children. On a sudden impulse, he called his CFO and authorized a massive, anonymous donation, enough to fund the charity for the next decade. It was the first thing he had done in years that wasn't for his own gain, and it felt good. It was a flicker of light in the darkness of his own making. The legal battle came to a head not in a courtroom, but in a sterile conference room. Logan and Owen Black sat on one side of a long mahogany table. Nora, Ava, and Maya sat on the other. Nora was now 8 months pregnant, her belly a proud, defiant statement. She was no longer the pale, trembling woman from the restaurant. She was calm, composed, her gaze steady. Logan had come prepared for a fight, for a negotiation. He was ready to increase the settlement, to throw more money at the problem until it went away. But Ava Reed didn't want to talk about money. She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a photograph. A grainy paparazzi photo, but the image was clear. It was Logan and Lena, kissing on the terrace of a hotel in Paris. The date stamp on the photo was from 6 months ago, the day of their 5th wedding anniversary, a day Logan had claimed to be in a critical negotiation in Zurich. Logan's blood ran cold. He had been so careful. How had they gotten it? "My client is not interested in your settlement, Mr. Vale," Ava said, her voice quiet but firm. "She is interested in a fair and equitable dissolution of the marriage. The prenuptial agreement has an infidelity clause, a clause which you seem to have forgotten. This photograph, along with sworn affidavits from the hotel staff, makes that clause enforceable. We are prepared to take this to trial. We will subpoena your business partners, your friends, and of course, Ms. Hart. I wonder how your conservative board of directors will feel about a public trial detailing your adultery." It was a checkmate. A public trial was the one thing Logan could not afford. It would be a circus, a disaster for his company's image. He was trapped. He looked across the table at Nora. He expected to see triumph in her eyes, a smug satisfaction. But he saw none. She just looked sad. Sad for him. Sad for them. Sad for the mess they had made. In that moment, he finally understood. This wasn't about revenge for her. It was about justice. It was about dignity. He looked at his lawyer, who gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. They were beaten. "Draw up a new agreement," Logan said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Give her whatever she wants." He stood up, his legs unsteady, and walked out of the room without looking back. He had come to the meeting a king, expecting to dictate the terms of surrender. He left a broken man, stripped of his power, his arrogance, and his pride. The reckoning had come, and it was far more costly than he had ever imagined. The divorce was finalized quietly a few weeks later. Nora, on Ava's advice, had not been greedy. She didn't want to be tied to Logan's empire for the rest of her life. She took a settlement that was fair, enough to ensure that she and her child would be secure, but not so much that it felt like blood money. Her victory was not in the amount, but in the principle. She had refused to be silenced, refused to be erased. The most important clause in the agreement had nothing to do with money. It was a custody agreement. Logan had initially wanted to fight for joint custody, another power play, another attempt to control her life through their child. But in the end, faced with the evidence of his infidelity and the quiet, unyielding strength Nora now possessed, he had conceded. She would have sole physical custody. He would have visitation rights, but they would be at her discretion. He had lost the right to make demands. 2 weeks after the papers were signed, Nora went into labor. It was a long and difficult birth, but Maya was by her side the entire time, holding her hand, breathing with her. And when she finally held her daughter for the first time, a tiny, perfect creature with a tuft of dark hair and her father's startlingly blue eyes, Nora felt a love so fierce and so profound it eclipsed everything else. She named her Kai. It was a name that felt like a prayer, a promise. Life in the Santa Monica bungalow was a world away from the glass house. It was messy, Noisy and filled with love, Maya stayed for the first 2 months, a godsend of practicality and unwavering support. They navigated the sleepless nights and the endless cycle of feeding and changing together. Nora, who had once felt like a curator in a museum, was now fully engaged in the beautiful, chaotic art of motherhood. She discovered a strength and a resilience she never knew she had. She was no longer Logan Vale's wife. She was Kai's mother. It was the most powerful title she had ever held. Logan, meanwhile, was adrift. His relationship with Lena had imploded shortly after the divorce. The thrill of the affair had been in the secrecy, the danger. Once they were a legitimate couple, the reality was far less glamorous. Their ambition, which had once been a source of attraction, now made them competitors. They clashed constantly, their egos too large to coexist in the same space. The relationship ended as it had begun, with a dramatic, bitter fight in a public place. He was alone, rattling around in the silent, empty glass house. The house, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a monument to his failure. Every gleaming surface reflected his solitude. He had everything he had ever wanted, the money, the power, the empire, but he had never felt more empty. He thought about Kai. He had seen the pictures Nora had sent him, as per their agreement. A tiny, swaddled bundle, a small, sleeping face. He felt a pull, a yearning that was completely foreign to him. It was not a desire for ownership or control. It was something softer, something more terrifying. It was love. He knew he had no right to be in her life. He had abdicated that right when he had chosen his ego over his family. But the thought of his daughter growing up without knowing him, of her thinking of him only as the villain in her mother's story, was an agony he couldn't bear. He had to try, not with a grand gesture, not with an expensive gift, but with something real. He had to earn his redemption. His first step was to sell the glass house. He couldn't heal in a place that was so full of ghosts. He sold it to a tech billionaire from another country and never looked back. He bought a smaller, more modest house in a quiet neighborhood, a place with a garden. His second step was to see a therapist. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. For a man who had built his life on a foundation of unshakable confidence, admitting he needed help felt like a catastrophic failure. But he went, week after week, and slowly, painfully, began to dismantle the fortress he had built around his heart. He talked about his own father, a cold, demanding man who had taught him that love was conditional, that emotion was weakness. He talked about his fear of failure, his addiction to control. He began to understand the man he had become. And for the first time, he wanted to be someone different. 6 months after Kai was born, he called Nora. His heart was pounding, his palms sweating. He had faced down hostile takeovers and federal regulators with less fear than he felt making this phone call. "Nora," he said when she answered. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual arrogance. I was wondering if I could see her. Kai, I'll come to you. Whatever time is good. Just for a few minutes." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Nora was wary. She had built a safe, peaceful world for her and her daughter, and she was terrified of letting him disrupt it. But she heard something in his voice she had never heard before. Humility. "Okay, Logan," she said, her voice cautious. "Saturday, at the park by the beach, 2 o'clock. He arrived early, clutching a small, stuffed bear. He saw them from a distance. Nora was sitting on a blanket, and Kai was on her lap, batting at a toy. Nora looked happy. Genuinely happy. The sight of it was a punch to the gut, a painful reminder of what he had thrown away. He approached them slowly, like a man approaching a timid animal he didn't want to scare away. He sat down on the edge of the blanket, keeping his distance. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi, Logan," Nora replied. Her voice was neutral, polite. He looked at his daughter. She was beautiful. She had his eyes, but she had her mother's smile. He felt a wave of love so overwhelming it brought tears to his eyes. He quickly blinked them away, embarrassed. He held out the stuffed bear. I brought this for her." Nora took it and gave it to Kai, who immediately tried to put its ear in her mouth. A small smile touched Nora's lips. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the gulls crying overhead and the distant crash of the waves. "I'm sorry, Nora," Logan said finally, the words raw and difficult. "For everything. Not just for Lena. For the way I treated you. For the man I was. You didn't deserve any of it. I was a coward. And I was a fool." Nora looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time that day. She saw the changes in him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, profound sadness. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. He looked smaller, more human. She knew that one apology could not erase years of pain. She knew that forgiveness was a long and complicated road. But she also knew that the man sitting in front of her was not the same man who had humiliated her in that restaurant. He was trying. "Thank you for saying that, Logan," she said quietly. "It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was a start. It was a single, fragile bridge across a vast canyon of hurt." He stayed for another hour. He didn't try to hold Kai. Didn't push for more than Nora was willing to give. He just watched her, his heart aching with a mixture of love and regret. When it was time to go, he stood up and looked at Nora. Can I do this again?" he asked, his voice full of a vulnerability she had never seen in him. Nora looked down at her daughter, who was now sleeping peacefully in her arms. Kai deserved to know her father, but she deserved to know the best version of him. Perhaps this man, this broken, trying man, could become that version. "We'll see, Logan," she said. "One day at a time." It was all he could ask for. He nodded, gave them one last lingering look, and walked away. He knew his path to redemption would be long. He had shattered his family, his marriage, and himself. But as he walked away from the beach, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't the thrill of a victory or the satisfaction of a successful deal. It was something much quieter, much more profound. It was hope. Nora watched him go, a complex mixture of emotions swirling within her. The glass house had been shattered, but in the breaking, the light had finally gotten in. Her future was no longer a gilded cage, but an open sky. And for her, and for Kai, it was a sky full of possibilities. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. That single, shattering moment in the restaurant was not the end of Nora's story. It was the beginning. It was the catalyst for a journey of incredible strength, of finding her voice, and of rebuilding a life on her own terms. Logan, the man who had everything, had to lose it all to finally find himself. Their story is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds can sometimes lead to our greatest transformations. If their emotional journey from betrayal to redemption moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who loves a story about the resilience of the human heart. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more real-life dramas and compelling stories. What did you think of Nora's choice in the end? Let us know in the comments below.
After the divorce, pregnant wife married a millionaire, but what happened next shocked her ex. In a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Boston, Lillian Alvarez believed her marriage was unshakable until it wasn't. Left with a newborn daughter and a shattered heart, she discovered that vows could be broken as swiftly as they were made. Clutching her baby close, she braced herself for a life without the man she'd once adored. Then, like an unexpected dawn, a charismatic millionaire named Christopher Friedman stepped into her world. Their whirlwind romance and sudden marriage made headlines, but what happened next would stun Lillian's ex-husband and rock the foundations of everything he thought he knew, because sometimes second chances come wrapped in secrets no one sees coming. Lillian Alvarez never imagined divorce papers would mar the coffee table in the living room she had painstakingly decorated. The pastel-colored walls, once echoing with laughter, now exuded a hollow chill. Her husband, ex-husband, she corrected herself bitterly, Ethan Marshall, packed the last of his belongings in cardboard boxes. He had insisted their split was mutual, but in truth, Lillian felt blindsided. They had been together since college, forging a bond that weathered late-night study sessions and cheap diners. For a while, it seemed love alone could conquer any struggle. But as the years passed, financial stress chipped away at Ethan's patience. His corporate ambitions overshadowed their once simple joys. When Lillian announced her pregnancy, she hoped it might spark renewed closeness. Instead, Ethan's frustration escalated. He claimed they weren't ready for parenthood. The ensuing arguments turned venomous. Now, with 6-month-old Ava cradled in her arms, Lillian watched Ethan's tense shoulders as he carried out the final box. He paused at the door, eyes flicking from Lillian to the baby. An emotion flitted across his face. Regret, sorrow, or guilt. She couldn't tell, but the moment was fleeting. He mumbled a goodbye and vanished into the drizzling rain. The metallic clang of his car trunk snapping shut echoed through the dreary afternoon. Lillian sank to the couch, tears slipping down her cheeks. She felt a crushing weariness, her life in tatters at 28. If not for Ava, she might have crumbled. But her daughter's gentle coo reminded her that she couldn't afford despair. She had a tiny soul relying on her. In the silence that followed, Lillian let her gaze wander over wedding photos perched on a side table. Their smiling faces beamed from better days. Shutting her eyes, she inhaled a shaky breath. She had to find a way forward, relying on her old administrative job at a local non-profit, scraping by in a home that now felt too big. Her parents were supportive, but they lived in Florida and had health issues of their own. Lillian refused to burden them further. "Goodbye, Ethan," she whispered softly, pressing a tender kiss to Ava's forehead. The baby clutched at her hair, babbling. In that sweet, innocent sound, Lillian found the faintest trace of hope. If she had learned anything from this heartbreak, it was that love could fail, but motherly devotion would not. In the weeks ahead, Lillian would wrestle with questions of identity and purpose, forging a new path while shielding her daughter from the wreckage. She had no idea that fate was about to introduce her to someone whose presence would upend everything she believed about second chances, and just how deeply that new connection would shock Ethan, the man who once swore to love her forever. Months trickled by, each day a testament to Lillian's resilience. She juggled motherhood, finances, and a smoldering sense of betrayal. Her job at the local non-profit, Bright Futures, helped keep the lights on. She cherished her role assisting underprivileged families find housing and job training. Though it wasn't glamorous, the work felt purposeful, a reflection of her caring spirit. Early one November morning, Lillian arrived at the Bright Futures office, balancing a diaper bag, half-finished coffee, and a stack of client files. The crisp autumn air bit at her cheeks, but she welcomed the bracing start. Once inside, she dropped Ava off at the small daycare corner run by volunteer retirees and hurried to her desk. Just as she settled, her supervisor, Paula Johnson, called her into a meeting. Expecting routine updates, Lillian was startled to see a tall, impeccably dressed man seated at the conference table. His presence radiated a quiet confidence, from the crisp lines of his tailored suit to the polite smile he flashed upon introduction. "This is Christopher Friedman," Paula said, gesturing warmly. "He's here to discuss a potential partnership with Friedman Associates. They're interested in funding some of our programs." Lillian's eyebrows rose in recognition. She had heard the Friedman name whispered in philanthropic circles. Apparently, Christopher Friedman was known for strategic investments and well-chosen charities. She offered a courteous handshake, trying to ignore how his gaze lingered on her a moment longer than expected. Christopher explained he was exploring non-profits that tackled housing insecurity. He asked pointed questions about bright futures, success rates, community engagement, future goals. Lillian, unexpectedly asked to speak, outlined the challenges families faced: unemployment, mental health, childcare. She described real-life stories, her voice tinged with heartfelt emotion. Christopher listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes. Something about his respectful attention and thoughtful queries calmed her nerves. She glimpsed none of the arrogant swagger she associated with wealthy philanthropists. At meeting's end, Christopher thanked them both and promised to send his team for a deeper assessment. He nodded at Lillian. "Your dedication is commendable. I sense your passion. It's rare." She blushed at the compliment, hurriedly excusing herself to retrieve Ava for a midday break. Yet as she walked, her mind kept drifting back to the intriguing aura Christopher Friedman exuded. There was sincerity in his tone she hadn't expected from a millionaire. That evening, Lillian returned to her modest house, feeding Ava mashed peas and tidying up scattered toys. She couldn't shake the memory of Christopher's steady gaze or the flutter in her chest when he spoke directly to her. Pushing the notion aside as ridiculous, she resolved to refocus on immediate concerns: bills, groceries, her daughter's well-being. Little did she realize that this unlikely intersection with a powerful philanthropist was merely the first ripple in a tide that would soon carry her into a whirlwind of change, and echo all the way to her ex-husband's door. Over the next few weeks, Friedman Associates quietly audited Bright Futures programs, evaluating metrics and success rates. Staff members were on edge, hoping this influential firm would become a steady funding source. Lillian found herself juggling client appointments and performing mini-tours for Friedman's analysts. Through it all, she rarely saw Christopher Friedman, though she heard updates from Paula about his interest in certain expansions. But one late afternoon, as she was about to clock out, he appeared at her desk unexpectedly. "I'm glad I caught you," he said, holding a sleek folder. "I've reviewed the final reports. I'd like to discuss them over coffee, get a more personal perspective from you if you have time." Normally Lillian would hesitate, especially after typical business hours, but she recalled Paula's emphasis on Friedman Associates' crucial support. She also couldn't deny a flicker of curiosity. "Sure," she agreed, checking the time. Ava was in daycare until 6, so she had a small window. "There's a cafe nearby." They ended up at a cozy spot lit by warm Edison bulbs. The rush-hour crowd bustled around them, but Lillian felt oddly at ease. Christopher pulled out a notebook, peppering her with questions about Bright Futures' day-to-day challenges, the emotional toll on staff, and her personal experiences. She recounted heartbreaking stories of single parents sleeping in cars, children caught in cycles of poverty. He listened with empathy, taking detailed notes. When they ran out of official topics, Lillian braced to leave, but Christopher hesitated. "I'm grateful for your insights. Sometimes these philanthropic decisions can feel like numbers on paper. You remind me there are real lives behind every statistic." She offered a half-smile. "That's why I work here. People aren't data points. They're human beings with stories." An unspoken warmth lingered in the air. Christopher's gaze flicked to a faint ring mark on her left hand, evidence of a band that once existed. He said gently, "I sense you have your own story, Lillian." She swallowed, remembering the heartbreak that preceded her new normal. "We all do," she said quietly, not elaborating. She glanced at the clock. "I should pick up my daughter." The word daughter seemed to spark something in him. a flicker of curiosity, but he only nodded politely. "Of course. Thank you again." As she rose, he stood, offering a soft, "Take care." That night, Lillian tried to focus on bedtime routines for Ava, baths, lullabies, warm milk, but her thoughts kept drifting to Christopher's quiet sincerity. She reminded herself that he was just a wealthy donor, nothing more. Yet she couldn't deny the strange sense of ease in his presence. Telling herself it was purely professional interest, she closed her eyes, nestling Ava's tiny body against her. If only she knew that an invitation lay ahead, one that would draw her closer into Christopher's orbit, testing her heart's readiness to trust again, and setting the stage for a chain of events that would leave Ethan stunned by the path his ex-wife would soon tread. December brought a whirlwind of holiday events, including the prestigious Benchmark Gala, an annual fundraiser that Friedman Associates co-sponsored with other corporate heavyweights. The rumor around Bright Futures was that Christopher Friedman planned to formally announce the firm's partnership with them at the event. For Lillian, the invitation to attend was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. A formal black tie affair at the opulent Milford Hotel, teeming with Manhattan's elite. Paula encouraged Lillian to go, insisting her perspective would demonstrate the real impact of Friedman Associates' donation. However, Lillian's budget didn't stretch to an expensive gown or hairstylist. She worried about standing out awkwardly among socialites, but Paula assured her that the organization would cover her expenses, seeing it as a promotional necessity. Reluctantly, Lillian accepted, not wanting to jeopardize the crucial funding for Bright Futures. The night of the gala, she found herself in a borrowed formal dress, black satin with modest beading, paired with simple heels. Her hair was swept into a neat bun by a friend skilled in hairstyling. Clutching the invitation in trembling hands, Lillian arrived at the Milford Hotel's grand ballroom. Soft orchestral music drifted across the marbled floors, and crystal chandeliers bathed guests in a warm glow. She scanned the crowd with uncertainty, searching for a familiar face. Spotting Paula near a lavish ice sculpture, she breathed relief and joined her. After brief introductions to various donors, Lillian sipped ginger ale, her gaze flitting nervously around. Then she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. Christopher Friedman stood behind her, looking every bit the polished host in a tailored tux. His eyes lit up with genuine warmth. "I'm glad you made it," he said, offering an encouraging smile. "You look—" He paused, as if searching for the right word. "Elegant." Heat rose in her cheeks. "Thank you. I'm not used to this kind of event," she admitted, gesturing to the swirl of designer gowns and diamond jewelry. She spotted celebrities, politicians, and business tycoons, all mingling with effortless confidence. Christopher guided her through the throng, introducing her to key figures. He asked her to share heartfelt stories of the family's bright futures served. Surprisingly, the more Lillian spoke, the more comfortable she felt. People listened attentively, moved by her authenticity. She realized Christopher had placed her in a position to shine, ensuring that the cause overshadowed any superficial chatter. After a round of toasts, Christopher gently tugged her aside to a quieter corner. "They've pledged double the amount we estimated," he revealed. "Your passion convinced them. This will transform your programs, Lillian." Emotion welled in her eyes. She glanced around at the glamorous setting, hardly believing that funds raised here would help struggling families. "Thank you," she whispered, her gratitude aimed not only at the donors, but at Christopher for championing their work. In that soft-lit corner, his gaze lingered on her face, an unspoken something passing between them. Then the band struck up a waltz, and couples drifted onto the dance floor. Christopher hesitated. "Would you like to dance, or do you need to get home to your daughter?" She bit her lip. For once, she wanted to savor a moment of normalcy. "Just one dance," she said softly. He took her hand, leading her onto the marble floor. As the music swelled, Lillian felt a glimmer of contentment. Unbeknownst to her, this graceful waltz would set in motion a deeper connection, one that promised to reshape her life and eventually send shockwaves all the way back to Ethan Marshall. The weeks following the gala brought a surprising shift in Lillian's daily routine. Christopher Friedman began visiting Bright Futures more frequently under the guise of monitoring the partnership's progress. But Lillian sensed a personal dimension in his visits. He'd bring coffee, linger at her desk, and pose thoughtful questions about her experiences as a single mother. A quiet bond blossomed, nurtured by shared lunches and short strolls to a nearby park during breaks. At first, Lillian kept her guard up. She had seen how illusions of care could mask deeper betrayals, like in her marriage to Ethan. But the more time she spent with Christopher, the more sincerity she perceived. He never pried into her personal life, though she could tell he was curious. She felt comfortable enough to mention Ava in casual conversation. He listened intently whenever she spoke of her daughter's baby babbles or bedtime routines. One Saturday morning, Christopher texted Lillian, asking if she might help him coordinate a small charity drive in the suburbs. The daycare center for working mothers could use some fresh supplies, and Friedman Associates wanted to sponsor a supply drop-off. Hesitant about devoting her weekend, Lillian eventually agreed. She reasoned it was for a good cause, and the charitable impetus aligned with her job. She packed Ava's diaper bag, planning to drop the baby at a neighbor's house, but Christopher insisted Ava could come along. "I'd love to meet her," he said simply. Thus, Lillian found herself at a suburban community hall, organizing boxes of diapers, formula, and baby clothes. Ava tottered around, her bright eyes taking in the new surroundings. Christopher arrived with a few Friedman Associates staff, directing them to set up a donation table. Once the supplies were neatly arranged, he turned his attention to Ava. The toddler, all curly hair and wide-eyed wonder, gazed up at the tall stranger. To Lillian's astonishment, Christopher knelt to Ava's level, gently offering a plush toy. Ava reached out, giggling. Over the next hour, Christopher found ways to engage her, letting her help carry small stuffed animals or making silly faces to coax adorable laughter. Lillian watched in silent fascination. She'd never witnessed such patient warmth from a man around her baby. Even Ethan, back when he lived with them, seemed distant toward paternal duties. After the supply distribution, staff departed, leaving just Lillian, Christopher, and Ava. Tired from the excitement, Ava dozed off in Lillian's arms. Christopher offered them a ride home in his sleek black SUV, which Lillian accepted cautiously. During the drive, she risked a glance at him, noticing how his expression softened whenever he peeked at Ava through the rearview mirror. Something in her chest stirred, an unfamiliar mix of gratitude and longing. Later that night, as Lillian rocked Ava to sleep in their modest living room, she reflected on Christopher Friedman's nurturing demeanor. She couldn't help but imagine a future in which a father figure offered more than scorn or neglect. A pang of guilt flashed. She still wrestled with the remnants of her love-hate relationship with Ethan. But as Ava snuggled closer, Lillian realized her daughter had instinctively approved of Christopher's gentle presence. And that small fact chipped away at the wall she'd built around her heart. Amid the blossoming friendship with Christopher Friedman, Lillian's life was abruptly rattled by a phone call one dreary afternoon. The caller ID flashed Ethan Marshall. Her throat clenched. She hesitated before answering, dreading a potential confrontation. But curiosity, tempered by lingering pain, spurred her to pick up. Ethan's voice had an edge of urgency. "Lillian, I need to see you. It's important." She suppressed a surge of irritation. "What for, Ethan?" "We've been divorced for months," he sighed heavily. "I realize that. But can I come over? Or maybe we meet somewhere neutral. Please, there's something I've got to tell you." Against her better judgment, Lillian agreed to a public meeting at a local cafe. After finishing her shift, she left Ava with a neighbor. Her heart pounded as she arrived, memories of heartbreak flooding back. She spotted Ethan by the window, tapping his fingers on the table. He looked older. Lines of stress creased his brow, and his once meticulous suit seemed wrinkled. "Thanks for meeting," he said, rising awkwardly. She offered a polite nod, taking a seat across from him. Silence hung thick for a moment before Ethan spoke in a rush. "I messed up, Lillian. Life post-divorce hasn't been good. My job at the investment firm ended, and finances are a wreck. My new relationship collapsed too." He cast her a pleading look, as if hoping for pity. Lillian's jaw tightened. He had left her struggling with a newborn while he chased success. Now he dared to unload his woes on her? She inhaled deeply, remembering her vow to keep calm. "I'm sorry things didn't work out," she said coolly, "but what does that have to do with me?" He fidgeted, swirling the coffee cup. "I miss Ava. I want to see her. Maybe be part of her life again." The words, though halting, struck her like a bolt. He had never previously displayed genuine interest in fatherhood. She saw the tension in his posture, a man cornered by regrets. Part of Lillian wanted to lash out. "Where were you when I needed help, when I was alone, raising her on a meager salary?" But she restrained herself, letting the hurt simmer. "It's complicated, Ethan. She's just over a year old now, doesn't know you. You can't walk in and out as you please." He rubbed his temples. "I know, I messed up. But can you blame me for trying to fix things?" His sincerity was questionable, yet Lillian glimpsed some flicker of regret. "I'll think about it," she said, voice shaky. "But don't get your hopes up. I won't let you hurt Ava." The meeting ended awkwardly, with Ethan's posture slumped in the drizzling rain outside. Lillian watched him go, confusion and anger battling in her chest. She returned home, mind swirling. On one hand, it felt vindicating to see Ethan face consequences. On the other hand, she worried about the heartbreak he might bring into Ava's life if he proved unreliable again. That evening, Christopher texted, "Everything all right? You seemed stressed at work." Lillian stared at his message, torn between relief at his concern and the chaos Ethan's return unleashed. She typed a brief, "I'm fine, thanks for asking." But inwardly, she braced herself. Fate, it seemed, had thrown Ethan back into her life just as a new door was opening. And soon, the collision of these worlds would set off a chain of events no one could predict. Snow coated the city streets in a sparkling hush, marking the official start of winter. Bright Futures wrapped up another successful quarter, buoyed by Friedman Associates' generous funding. Lillian found herself increasingly in Christopher's sphere. He often dropped by to brainstorm new outreach strategies or invite her to philanthropic dinners. Their bond grew steadily, fueled by shared passions and mutual respect. On a crisp December evening, Christopher asked Lillian to join him for a charity event celebrating the opening of a transitional housing complex. She felt a twinge of guilt leaving Ava with her neighbor again, but the cause was dear to her heart. She arrived wearing a simple navy dress, glad for the coat that shielded her from the biting cold. Christopher, in a charcoal suit, greeted her at the entrance, warmth radiating from his every gesture. The event unfolded in a modest church hall, its walls decorated with photos of families who would benefit from the new housing. Lillian spoke with unwavering conviction, explaining how stable housing could break generational cycles of poverty. Christopher, smiling at her side, introduced her to donors, praising her dedication. At the end of the evening they headed outside, the snowfall turning the city lights into a glittering mosaic. Christopher offered to walk her back to her car. Under a flickering street lamp, he halted, tucking his hands into his coat pockets with an air of nervousness she'd never seen before. "I've been pondering something for a while," he began softly. "Lillian, you and Ava have brought light into my life. I'd assumed wealth was enough, but you taught me the power of human connection. My philanthropic ambitions feel more meaningful now." He inhaled, exhaling a visible puff in the freezing air. "What if we tried to be more than friends?" Lillian's breath caught. They had teetered on this possibility, glances, near confessions, yet hearing the words out loud shook her. After the trauma of her marriage's collapse, was she ready for something new, and with a man so different from Ethan? Christopher pressed on gently. I know your trust was broken before. I'd never rush you. But you should know, I love you, Lillian, and I want to be part of your life, part of Ava's life, if you'll let me. Tears stung her eyes, warring with the fear that had haunted her. She remembered Ethan's charm at first, then the heartbreak that followed, but Christopher Friedman was not Ethan. He'd shown consistent kindness, respect for her autonomy, genuine affection for Ava. Still, it was almost too overwhelming to respond. Her voice trembled. I care about you too, but I have to protect my daughter. He nodded, relief and tenderness blending in his features. We'll go at your pace, but I wanted you to know how I feel. She leaned into his warmth, heart pounding. Snowflakes landed on her eyelashes, mirroring the trembling tears she fought back. She couldn't promise immediate acceptance of a relationship, but she felt a door in her heart crack open. In that silent, snowy street, Christopher Friedman's confession hung in the air, a hopeful vow that, if nurtured carefully, could change her life forever. As the holiday season reached its peak, Lillian struggled with a swirl of emotions. Christopher's declaration echoed in her mind. She found solace in sharing her conflicted feelings with Carmen, who cheered her on, exclaiming that not everyone gets a second chance at happiness, especially with a man of genuine character. Meanwhile, Ethan's call to see Ava weighed heavily, overshadowing her budding romance. She fretted over exposing her daughter to a father who might disappoint them again. New Year's Eve arrived, bringing a glimmer of excitement. Christopher invited Lillian and Ava to celebrate at a cozy cabin he'd rented in the Adirondacks, along with a few close friends. Initially, she hesitated. Traveling with a toddler to meet new people felt daunting, but his gentle assurance and the thought of a real holiday escape convinced her to say yes. The cabin stood amidst a snowy forest, its warm lights casting a golden glow on the frosted trees. Inside, crackling logs in the fireplace exuded a welcoming heat. Christopher's friends were a mix of philanthropic colleagues and childhood companions. They greeted Lillian kindly, fussing over adorable Ava. The baby squealed with delight at the novelty of the fireplace and the glimpses of snow through wide windows. Over a buffet of homemade stews, fresh bread and holiday pastries, laughter filled the cabin. Despite the presence of near strangers, Lillian felt strangely at ease. Christopher ensured she never felt left out, keeping an arm around her whenever conversation turned technical or referencing her vital role at Bright Futures. Late into the evening, while Ava dozed in a makeshift crib, the adults drank champagne, reminiscing about past years and listing hopes for the future. As midnight neared, they gathered outside to watch a private fireworks display Christopher had arranged. Lillian wrapped a thick blanket around herself, arms cradling the now sleepy Ava. The sky erupted in brilliant colors, reflecting on the shimmering snowbanks. Soft oohs and ahs accompanied each burst of light. Christopher slipped beside her. The swirling fireworks illuminated his face with fleeting bursts of pink, green, and gold. He gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. "Thank you for coming. I know this might feel like a leap," she smiled, leaning into him. "A leap, yes, but it feels right." At the stroke of midnight, the group cheered, hugging each other. Christopher carefully took Ava from Lillian's arms, pressing a kiss to the baby's forehead. Then he looked at Lillian, emotion brimming. Under the fireworks blaze, he leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her lips. Time seemed to slow, the kiss tender and full of unspoken promises. In that moment, Lillian realized she was forging a new future, one that might be drastically different from her past. She felt a rush of gratitude and an inkling of the complexities that lay ahead. Because love stories aren't solely about confetti and bright lights. They're also about the unexpected entanglements that can reappear at the most inopportune times. Soon enough, Ethan would play his hand, and the world Lillian was carefully building could be thrown into disarray. January ushered in new routines for Lillian. She moved in measured steps toward a deeper relationship with Christopher. They continued to see each other outside of work, sharing dinners at her home where he'd help feed Ava, earning the toddler's giggles with silly spoon games. Lillian was touched by how quickly and earnestly he adapted to the day-to-day tasks of caring for a small child. Ethan, meanwhile, remained a sporadic presence. He texted occasionally, asking if Lillian had considered letting him visit Ava. She remained hesitant, demanding proof of stable employment and perhaps therapy if he truly wanted to rectify his absence. To her surprise, Ethan responded that he'd found a new job in a smaller firm and was meeting with a counselor to address his emotional shortcomings. It was a small step, but not enough to earn her trust yet. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, Christopher invited Lillian to Friedman Associates' annual staff celebration. It was a large gathering held at a countryside estate with employees, executives, and their families. Lillian debated whether to bring Ava, but Christopher insisted that it was family-friendly and Ava would be welcomed. She agreed, albeit with nervous excitement. The estate grounds sprawled with gardens and a heated pavilion for children's activities. Staff members mingled in a lavish hall, sipping mulled cider and enjoying live music. Ava, bundled in a warm coat, toddled after a small group of other children, her wide eyes brimming with curiosity. Lillian stuck close, introducing herself to Friedman Associates employees who recognized her from philanthropic photos with Christopher. She half expected them to judge her as a gold digger, but surprisingly, many seemed genuinely kind, remarking on Christopher's improved morale since meeting her. During a lull, Christopher guided Lillian onto a terrace overlooking a frozen lake. The hush of winter enveloped them, broken only by the distant laughter of children. He turned to her, wearing a solemn expression. "Lillian, I want you to know I've been thinking about the future. Ours." Her heart thumped. "We've only just begun," she said softly. "I'm still adjusting." He clasped her hand. "I understand, but there's something else you should know. My mother, Celia Friedman, is returning from Europe next week. She's traditional about our family's status. I suspect she'll be wary of me dating a single mother." A flicker of tension crossed his features. "I want you to be prepared. I'll stand by you, of course, but—" Lillian swallowed, recalling the sting of being labelled "not enough" by Ethan's more affluent circle. She offered a steady nod. "I'm not ashamed of my life or my baby. If she judges me, that's her choice. I won't let it sway how I feel about you." Relief softened Christopher's expression, and he pulled her closer. She leaned her head against his shoulder, inhaling the scent of pine from the estate's evergreens. Yet an undercurrent of apprehension pulsed. She sensed a new confrontation looming. Because whenever society and status intrude on love, turmoil often follows. And across town, Ethan too was preparing his next steps, determined not to be forgotten in the life Lillian was constructing. Lillian's first meeting with Celia Friedman took place at a discreet brunch in one of Manhattan's elegant townhouses. Christopher arranged the meeting in hopes of setting a cordial tone. Lillian's stomach churned with nerves. She dressed conservatively, settling Ava in a sweet pastel outfit. Upon arrival, the doorman guided them to a tastefully furnished sitting room where Celia Friedman awaited. A tall woman in her early 60s, Celia exuded a timeless poise. She rose from a velvet armchair, greeting Christopher with a reserved embrace. Then her gaze fell upon Lillian and the child in her arms. An almost imperceptible flicker of surprise crossed Celia's features. She forced a polite smile. "Miss Alvarez, is it? Pleasure to meet you." Polite but cool, Lillian dipped her head in greeting. "Thank you, Mrs. Friedman. This is my daughter, Ava." Celia's eyes swept over the baby. "Oh, hello there, little one." She extended a finger, which Ava eyed curiously. Christopher, sensing the tension, guided them to the dining table decked with fine china. Servers moved soundlessly, pouring tea into porcelain cups. As they settled, Celia began making small talk, asking about Lillian's job at Bright Futures, her background. Lillian responded earnestly, but felt the undercurrent of scrutiny. Celia Friedman was not outwardly hostile, yet something in her direct gaze suggested she weighed every word, silently evaluating whether Lillian fit into the Friedman legacy. Christopher tried to steer the conversation toward philanthropic interests, praising Lillian's role in shaping new outreach programs. Celia nodded graciously, but remained aloof. Midway through the meal, she set down her teacup. "Christopher has mentioned a serious attachment here," she said delicately. "I'm curious about your plans for the future, Mrs. Alvarez." Heat rushed to Lillian's cheeks. She knew this question was about more than just tomorrow. It was about status, finances, a certain Friedman brand of tradition. She swallowed. "I'm devoted to raising my daughter and continuing my work. Christopher and I have grown close, but we're navigating step by step. We want to ensure stability for Ava." Celia's gaze flicked to her son. "And what of the child's father? Are there entanglements we should know about?" Christopher tensed. Before Lillian could respond, he said firmly, "That's not an issue for you to worry about, Mother. Lillian has full custody." Celia's lips pressed thin, but she softened her tone. "I don't intend to pry, but I've seen how messy family matters can become. We Friedmans must protect our own. Christopher's future is tied to certain responsibilities." Lillian stiffened. The implication was clear. She and Ava might represent a liability. Summoning composure, she managed a small smile. "I appreciate your concern. Christopher and I are handling things. My only interest is ensuring Ava's happiness." The brunch ended with an uneasy civility. As Christopher escorted Lillian out, he apologized. "I know my mother can be intense, but trust me, I won't let her deter us." Lillian exhaled, hugging Ava close. She recalled how Ethan's mother once made veiled comments about her middle-class roots. This felt eerily similar, yet Christopher's resolve comforted her. She knew adversity would come from all directions: wealth, ex-spouses, societal expectations. Only time would reveal if their fragile new love could withstand these pressures. And time, as always, was about to deliver more surprises than any of them could predict. Amid the complexities of Celia Friedman's tacit disapproval, Lillian found a delicate balance with Christopher. She avoided direct confrontations with his mother, trusting that over time Celia might soften or at least tolerate the relationship. Meanwhile, Ethan's request to see Ava nagged at her. Each day she contemplated the risk of letting him re-enter their daughter's life. Could a father-child bond flourish so late, especially with her own heartbreak lingering? One late afternoon, after her shift at Bright Futures, Lillian received a cryptic message from Ethan. "I'm in town." "Let me see her. 1 hour at the cafe on Elm Street. No more excuses." She exhaled shakily, half tempted to refuse, but something in his tone suggested a desperation beyond typical paternal interest. She texted back, "Fine. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. But I'm not promising anything." The next day, she brought Ava, cautious, though she loathed the idea of reintroducing her to a father who abandoned them. Ethan awaited in a corner booth. His eyes widened at the sight of the child, now a vibrant toddler with shining curls. Lillian noted how he slumped, tears forming. "She's grown so much," he whispered, voice thick. At first Ava clung to Lillian's leg, wary of this unfamiliar man. Gently, Lillian coaxed her onto Ethan's lap. The baby's eyes studied him. A few awkward minutes passed, then Ava giggled at some silly face Ethan pulled. A fleeting warmth blossomed, like a father connecting with his child. Lillian felt a tug of longing for what might have been, but as the hour wore on, Ethan shifted topics. "Listen, Lillian, I've been struggling. Lost my job. Finances are tough. I'm behind on rent." He paused, clearing his throat. "I was hoping, could you help me out? Maybe your new boyfriend could help." Her blood ran cold. She stared at him, lips parted. "Excuse me," he pressed, eyes darting with a desperate glint. "I know Friedman has money. If you two are serious, maybe he can spare—" Anger flared. "Ethan, you're basically asking me to beg Christopher Friedman for money to bail you out." That's insane. He grabbed her wrist, voice lowering to a hiss. You owe me. Remember, we had plans until you decided to keep the baby, then bailed on our marriage. Heat rose in her cheeks. She yanked free, heart pounding with outrage. You left me alone with Ava. Don't you dare twist the story. Ava began to whimper at the tension, tears rolling down her tiny cheeks. Ethan's face contorted. Don't test me, Lillian. If Friedman's in the picture, maybe I'll fight for custody to get my share. I know how the legal system works. Your new fiancé is a millionaire. Judges might see you as unfit, bouncing from a broken marriage to another man. She trembled, hugging Ava protectively. This was blackmail, plain and simple. Stay away from us, she growled, voice shaking with fury. Scooping up Ava, she fled the cafe, tears burning in her eyes. Racing home, she felt panic and rage swirl. Ethan's desperation had morphed into a threat of custody entanglement. The fragile peace she found with Christopher was at risk. That evening she confided everything to Christopher, who clenched his jaw in anger. He promised to use all legal means to protect her and Ava. But Lillian still felt a shiver of dread. She had discovered a new love, only to have her ex dangle the threat of a custody battle that could overshadow all else. Little did she know that the next chapter would spin events faster than any of them anticipated, leading to a revelation that would leave Ethan thoroughly stunned. The tension wrought by Ethan's threat weighed heavily on Lillian and Christopher. To preempt any legal fiasco, Christopher arranged a meeting with a top family law attorney who confirmed that Ethan could file for partial custody, though he'd need solid grounds to argue Lillian was unfit. The attorney reassured them that Ethan's inconsistent presence and financial instability weakened his case, but the stress lingered. Christopher, seeing Lillian's anxiety, tried to lighten her load. He insisted on hiring a small legal team at Friedman Associates' expense. Lillian resisted at first, not wanting to appear reliant on his wealth. But concern for Ava's well-being prevailed, and she reluctantly agreed. Meanwhile, Christopher's mother, Celia, remained wary of Lillian's baggage, though she offered no overt opposition. Amid the swirling drama, Christopher summoned his courage. One breezy spring evening, he invited Lillian and Ava to a newly renovated Friedman-funded playground in a picturesque park near the Hudson River. Toddler laughter filled the air as children raced across fresh turf. Ava squealed with excitement, exploring the slides and swings. While Ava played with a volunteer caretaker, Christopher led Lillian on a leisurely stroll along the water's edge. Tall lanterns cast gentle light as the sun dipped below the horizon. She inhaled the crisp air, letting the scenic beauty soothe her frayed nerves. Christopher's silence was uncharacteristic. He seemed deep in thought, hands fiddling in his pockets. At a scenic overlook he paused, turning to face her. "Lillian," he murmured, voice trembling, "the last few months have been more meaningful than any chapter of my life. You and Ava, you fill a void I didn't know existed. I love you both." He inhaled, then sank to one knee. Her heart leapt. She clasped a hand to her mouth, tears pricking her eyes. Christopher Friedman, the philanthropic millionaire who once strolled into her office unannounced, was kneeling before her, holding a small velvet box. The shimmering diamond ring inside caught the lantern light. "I know things are complicated," he continued, voice shaking with emotion. "But I want to protect you, stand by you, and be a father to Ava, if you'll have me. Will you marry me, Lillian?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. She remembered the heartbreak with Ethan, the swirl of doubts about second chances. Yet Christopher's devotion had proven genuine, unwavering, even in the face of Ethan's intimidation. She glanced at the ring, then back at his earnest face. Her voice wobbled as she whispered, "Yes." He rose, sweeping her into his arms. Their lips met in a tender kiss, the swirl of the river breeze around them. Applause erupted from passers-by, who realized what had transpired. Lillian laughed through tears, turning to find Ava toddling up with the caretaker, as if sensing the significance of the moment. For Lillian, the proposal felt like a sudden leap off a precipice, both thrilling and terrifying. Yet Christopher's love gave her courage to believe in a future where her past no longer chained her. Meanwhile, far across town, Ethan would soon learn of this engagement in a manner that would upend his assumptions and push him to his breaking point. The final confrontation loomed on the horizon, promising revelations that no one saw coming. In the whirlwind weeks that followed, the Friedman family moved swiftly to plan an intimate but tasteful wedding. Celia Friedman maintained a polite facade, though she cast a shadow of skepticism about the union. Still, Christopher insisted on a ceremony that wasn't ostentatious. He only wanted close friends, immediate family, and a few special colleagues, including Lillian's co-workers from Bright Futures. When Lillian informed Ethan, more as a courtesy than a request for approval, he reacted with stunned silence. Then came an onslaught of text messages demanding explanations, accusing her of robbing him of a chance to reconcile. Lillian ignored them. She wouldn't let his manipulations mar her new joy. She had covered her legal bases and ensured her attorney was ready if Ethan attempted to sabotage the event. The wedding day dawned bright, sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows of a quaint chapel Christopher had chosen. Lillian stood in a simple yet elegant lace gown, hands trembling. Carmen fussed with her veil, beaming with pride. In the corner, Paula dabbed her eyes with a tissue, whispering how she'd never seen Lillian look so radiant. Baby Ava, dressed in a tiny white frock, clung to her mother's side, occasionally babbling happily. Lillian reflected on her tumultuous journey. Divorce, heartbreak, single parenthood. Now, a future brimming with possibilities stretched before her. She inhaled deeply, stepping out into the chapel's aisle to the soft strains of a violin. Christopher waited at the altar, wearing a tailored navy suit. His gaze locked on her with unmasked affection. As Lillian reached him, she realized tears shone in his eyes. The officiant's words blurred in a swirl of emotion. She felt a gentle brush of Christopher's thumb over her knuckles, steadying her heart. They exchanged vows, earnest promises woven with references to love, trust, and shared responsibility for Ava's well-being. "By the power vested in me," the officiant concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Applause and quiet cheers erupted. Christopher sealed the union with a tender kiss. In that moment, Ethan slipped into the back of the chapel, uninvited. He froze at the sight of the wedded couple. Lillian's wide-eyed gaze caught him in the corner of her vision. For a charged moment, the newlyweds and the intruder locked eyes. Then Ethan stormed forward, ignoring the hush that fell over the pews. Lillian's breath hitched. Christopher placed himself between her and Ethan. Fury contorted Ethan's features. "You really did it," he spat, voice echoing in the stunned silence. "Marrying into money without giving me a chance to fix our family." She forced herself to stay calm. "We haven't been a family in a long time, Ethan. You made that choice, and now I've made mine." Before Ethan could spew further vitriol, Christopher quietly signaled the security detail. 2 ushers escorted Ethan outside, who barked threats that no one took seriously. Lillian trembled in relief, tears threatening to spill. Christopher enveloped her in a gentle embrace, guests exhaling in collective empathy. The ceremony might have ended in disarray, but the vow was sealed. Lillian, now Mrs. Friedman, felt a wave of defiant strength surge through her. Ethan's last-ditch attempt had failed, and in doing so, he had only underscored how far she'd come. In the days after the wedding, Lillian and Christopher Friedman embarked on a brief honeymoon, traveling to a secluded villa on the coast of Santorini, Greece, with Ava in tow. The azure waters and whitewashed buildings provided a peaceful respite. Each morning they savored breakfast on a sun-drenched terrace, while Ava toddled around chasing butterflies. Each evening they sipped local wine, discussing plans for the future. Expanding Bright Futures, building a stable home life, maybe even giving Ava siblings down the line. Ethan's disruptive appearance at the wedding had left them shaken, but Christopher's unwavering presence comforted Lillian. If any custody threat remained, they trusted the legal team to handle it. She felt a growing sense of security, grateful that her heartbreak had led her to a man who cherished her daughter as his own. Yet the biggest shock came upon their return to New York. Lillian found a thick envelope on the Friedman penthouse doorstep. Inside was a paternity test result, addressed to Ethan. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she read the details. Probability of paternity, upper 0%. A scribbled note accompanied it. So you see, Ava was never mine. I hope you're proud. The signature was Ethan's. Heart pounding, Lillian stared at the test. According to this, Ethan was never biologically Ava's father. She felt numb, recollecting the timeline. She had never strayed in her marriage. Could the test be falsified? Or was Ethan raising a suspicion that her child was someone else's? Christopher, noticing her distress, gently took the papers from her trembling hands. "This is nonsense," he said firmly, scanning the result. "We both know your situation." But doubt gnawed at Lillian. Could the test be accurate? Had there been a mix-up at the clinic? She recalled how hurried and inattentive Ethan had been during her pregnancy. Or perhaps Ethan manipulated a fake test to sow chaos in her new marriage. Confusion tangled her thoughts. Over the following week, Christopher's legal team discovered Ethan had attempted to weaponize the test in a last-ditch custody claim, arguing that if he wasn't the father, he bore no financial responsibility nor any paternal rights, thus avoiding child support. But why claim zero paternity now after threatening a custody battle? The Friedman attorneys swiftly dismissed it as a stunt, likely orchestrated to jolt Lillian into confrontation. Yet the emotional toll lingered. Christopher urged Lillian to get an independent DNA test done, if only to soothe her mind. She complied, and the results reaffirmed what she already knew deep down. Ethan was the father, the test refuting the spurious document. With a sense of finality, they recognized Ethan's move as the final act of a desperate man, creating confusion, then fleeing accountability. As the Friedmans closed this chapter, word of the paternity scandal rippled through certain circles, reaching the ears of those who once whispered about Lillian's gold-digging ways. The truth that Ethan's document was fraudulent swiftly overshadowed the rumor. In the end, the shock that Ethan had intended for Lillian rebounded, painting him as the deceiver. Freed from his manipulations, Lillian embraced her new life wholeheartedly, armed with the knowledge that illusions, once shattered, yield space for genuine love to thrive. Sometimes the harshest heartbreaks become a gateway to unimagined hope. For Lillian Alvarez, divorce was an ending, but not the one she feared. Struggling to raise her baby alone, she discovered a beacon of kindness in Christopher Friedman, a man whose generosity proved deeper than any check he could write. Together, they dismantled prejudices, navigated disapproving family expectations, and defied an ex-husband's desperate schemes. Through courage and trust, they forged a bond that championed Lillian's independence and cradled Ava with genuine fatherly devotion. If you found yourself immersed in this tale of shattered vows, renewed faith, and the shocking twists that fate can deliver, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support fuels more stories filled with drama, heart, and the unyielding promise that every ending can also be a beginning. Thank you for following Lillian's journey. And remember, true love isn't measured by wealth, but by the unwavering commitment to stand by each other against all odds.